Welcome everyone, I'm Anita, a self-confessed property addict, and this is No Place Like Home, a podcast brought to you by Hamptons estate agents, home experts since 1869. Now I'll be bringing listeners the best home expertise throughout the year, and I've enlisted some of Britain's best known talent to help me along the way. So wherever you're listening, you have come to the right place. Subscribe to stay tuned with upcoming episodes. You will not want to miss this. No one forgets unlocking the door of a new property for the very first time. Whether you're a seasoned homeowner or a first-time renter, it's a magical feeling, like stepping into your future. I remember opening the door to my first little flat and thinking, this is all mine. I can do whatever I want. And I did. Well, lots has changed since then, but I know how much it meant to have a home of my own. In today's episode, we're starting with the basics. This is Property 101, and we'll be answering all your burning questions about sales and rentals in 2023. So whether you're buying or selling, letting or renting, or even simply window shopping, we've got you covered. And we're extremely lucky to welcome two incredible guests to help. Today, I'm speaking with Amanda Lamb, one of TV's best-loved broadcasters with over 20 years of experience presenting property shows. We're also joined by one of property's freshest faces, Grant Bates, dubbed London's coolest agent. He's the most followed estate agent across Instagram and TikTok, thanks to his London Property Tours series and his fun and accessible advice. Coolest agent.
Yeah, I mean, all eyes. I was going to jump in, but I didn't want to interrupt you.
That is a lot to live up to.
Yeah, I know. The pressure's high.
This is so exciting to have you both with me. Thank you.
Oh, you're so
Pleasure.
welcome.
First podcast that we are launching in this series, so there's lots to get into. But I'm going to start with the basics. I explained that I am a property addict. I know the two of you are as well, but we're not alone. We love watching TV shows about property. We love looking at property online. We're obsessed. Even if we're not going to buy a house, we want to know about other people's properties. Where does this obsession come from, Amanda? What is it?
It's so interesting, isn't it? Because I think as a nation we are. You know, I've spent the last 20 years travelling around Europe, and I think we are obsessed, aren't we?
Yeah, we really are. I mean, I don't know where it stems from. I remember my parents talking to me constantly about property and renovating property, and my dad was in housing. Maybe that's where part of it comes from. But I think also the Brits, and especially Londoners, are obsessed with period property, like characterful properties, and we're blessed with a lot of those.
Is there something to do with the dream? You know, you kind of, your house is where you live. It sort of says so much about you. So even if you can't afford what's the most expensive property you've got coming on?
Something, I can't raise 165 potentially.
165 million. Like
Not
my
1,000.
No, exactly. Yeah, wouldn't it? Like, I am going to look at that property.
Yeah.
One day maybe. I don't know what's in my destiny. But however, you know, it's just imagining yourself living in a house really takes you into another world, doesn't it?
I think it does, and I think it's also sort of first memories. I don't know about you two, but I can remember when I was a little girl, I was 5.
Yeah.
And I grew up on an enormous housing estate, and our house had just been built, and we were the first people to ever live there. And I can remember getting in my van, or not my van, my dad's van, and we were sat in the front and we drove there. And I remember running into the house and you know, we didn't have any carpet, so it wasn't painted, but I can remember the floorboards. I can remember saying to my mum, look, it's a brand new toilet. Nobody else has sat on it.
It's a big deal, yeah.
But it was the feeling of home. And I think that's what gets us. It's not just the bricks and mortar. It's that feeling of safety and security that you get when you shut that front door.
Is that when you first realised, okay, maybe that's when you think back to where your interest started? Was that the moment?
Absolutely.
Because then you went off and you actually became an estate agent.
I did, yeah. So I left school at 15.
Wow.
I mean, literally, I became an estate agent when dinosaurs still roamed the earth. There were no computers, there was no internet, you know.
Is this before the modelling?
Yes. So it was 1988. I left school in 1988, and I remember my mum saying to me, make sure you can type. That was the advice. You can always get a job if you can type.
Brilliant. Well, it's true. I mean, good skill.
I wasn't very good at it, but I did get a job. I got offered 2 jobs, one in a solicitor's and one in an estate agent's. And I like the wallpaper in the estate agents, which is why I went for that. But then once I was in there, I was hooked. I love learning about the way people live and what makes them tick.
I think it's relative and aspirational, right? Like at all levels, there's an aspiration, whether it's a 1-bedroom flat or a 20-bed mansion at 165 million, there's different levels to that aspiration. It's relative to each person. So I think that's probably a common theme running through it. But similar to you, actually, I started in agency. I did my A-levels, didn't do that well, but I did my A-levels and just couldn't face uni and went straight into property. And it was accessible as well in terms of a career.
Yeah.
It was an option for me. And I was always a bit cheeky and a bit of a salesperson in that sense. So it was a nice fit.
You need the personality. You need to be able to sell. You need to convince people that this is, because not everyone can see it when you step in.
100%. And I think I'm a bit of a matchmaker. All my single girlfriends, I'm always trying to match them up. And I think it's the same with houses. I love that idea of somebody walking into the office and, they're desperately looking for something. They've been let down. And they have this dream. And for me to try and match them with a house. And that's why it's been so wonderful, with my career now, even with Place in the Sun and all the other houses or property shows that I've done, it's all about matching someone with their dream house.
Do you think, because you've done it for so long, that you get an instinct? Actually, you sometimes feel, I think I know what you want. You don't know, but I know.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah?
It takes a while to get people to that point a lot of the time. Like, people will have a wish list and that will change. It's always fluid. It depends on what they see as you take them out. But often I think sometimes better than the client does, but it's about showing them the different options until they get to a point where they're comfortable. But there's definitely a real human element to it as well. Like, absolutely love matching people to their homes, for sure. And
also, you get to do that. You get to snoop around other people's houses. I mean, if you're nosy, most of us are. You're desperate to see how people live.
My favourite time of the year is when the clocks go back and everyone leaves their curtains open. So when you're walking down the street at night, you go, oh, I didn't know he'd done it like that. And I did it. I love it. I love it. It's a wonder I've not been arrested.
Yeah. No, I definitely haven't done that, but I'm not judging you. It's fine.
So come on, Amanda, tell us some funny stories of the places that you've been into.
I've got lots of stories. I'll try and keep it brief. So back in the early noughties, I think it was about 2004, I was filming A Place in the Sun and we were out in Marbella and we managed to gain access to a house that Prince owned.
What?
And we went to have a look around it and I was beside myself. And it's exactly what you want. The big electric gates. You walked into the front door and there was this huge sweeping staircase. And it was when he became the symbol. So there was these huge, beautiful drapes with the symbol embroidered on it. It was a huge picture of him naked from the torso up at the top of the stairs. And I remember going into his bedroom and before I went in thinking, please let it be a pop star bedroom. Please don't let it just be like some sort of bog standard 4-poster bed, purple satin sheets, mirror on the ceiling.
Shush! Come on!
But the best bit was, because, God rest his soul, he was quite small, wasn't he? He wasn't the tallest pop star in the world. Everything had been built smaller than you would imagine.
Okay.
So we had sort of purple marble worktops, which was just fabulous. But the toilet, so obviously you need to go to the toilet on Prince's toilet because it's like part of the deal. So I went to go to the toilet and when you go to a kid's school and all the toilets are slightly lower than they should be, well, I not really thought about it. So I just sat down expecting to, and I obviously didn't sit down and I hit my coccyx on the toilet. Hurt. So I was sort of on the floor, like lying on the floor.
Did he have one of those things you use for your kids as well? That you
like
put
a little step.
Little step to get up and then those things on the toilet bowl so you can fit into it.
He had a purple marble barbecue. I remember that. And I remember just thinking,
did you break your ass on Prince's
toilet? It
did
hurt quite a bit, actually. But it was the lying on the floor, things around my ankles just going, this really, really hurts. And then trying to get up and walk out again and sort of play it cool. But
so you just got to wander around his house.
It was amazing.
Are there any houses that you wish you'd bought yourself?
Oh, yeah. I mean, when we first started filming A Place in the Sun, we did Europe, but then we went further afield and we went to... can
we just take a minute? What a gig.
I know.
Yeah.
What a gig.
It was my first gig as well.
Oh, come on.
I know. It's like, would you mind?
Travelling the world.
Yeah, okay.
Seeing people's houses.
If I have to. There were two that always come to mind. One was on a tiny Caribbean island called Carriacou. And I remember the director and I were like, let's buy it, we can split it. And we were being totally impractical. But it was amazing just watching these little hummingbirds that also, they have you ever seen a hummingbird in real life? They don't look real. They look like a mythical creature. They're tiny little things. And we were like, oh, beats the sparrows that we get back home. And then there was another one on a Greek island of Paros. And it was owned by a German architect and his wife. And what he did was he bought a plot of land and then he camped on it for about 2 weeks. And he watched where the sun rose and the sun set. And he built this house around that. So the bedroom was, you could have your coffee in the morning as the sun was rising, and then the afternoon, and then cocktails as the sun was setting. It was stunning. So there's a lot that have got away from me.
That's commitment, camping out for 2 weeks. Could have just used a compass, no?
Oh, see, so I was going to talk about
the romance. Exactly. Come on,
heart versus head. I think it's very plain to see where we both stand.
Yeah, where's the romance in that? So let's talk about people who are looking for properties. I know we're talking about a place in the sun, so that's something very specific because they're often looking for their second home. But what are the things that we should look out for? Let's talk about people who are looking to buy a property. What are the things that house hunters need to prioritise? And this is a question for both of you.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because we've just been talking about heart versus head. And I don't know about you, but when I was an estate agent, I would have so many clients that would come with a list, and then they'd walk into somewhere that didn't have anything on that list, but they'd be like, oh, this is it. This is the one. It's an interesting one, isn't it? How you have to balance practicality with that gut feeling.
It's not always easy to quantify at all, because like you say, it's emotion, and the worst feedback sometimes for a client to get is, oh, they didn't get the right feeling, because you can't give any reason as to why. But I always tell people, buy the things that you can't change first, right? So buy the orientation, the way it faces, the character, the period, buy the things that you can't change. The interior, the location, you can't pick it up and move it. Obviously, the interiors can change. You can extend, you can renovate kitchens, bathrooms, whatever. But the bones of it, you're never going to be able to change, as long as that's your go-to first. But again, not everyone can see that. Not everyone has the vision or indeed the appetite, because it's a slog doing a renovation.
Here's the thing about vision. So you're right, not everyone does have the vision, and most people think they have, but you know better than I do, because you do this for a living. How can you convince people to see what you can see?
I think it's a really interesting one, because a lot of people have, like you say, they don't have the vision. I remember when I bought the house that we're in at the moment, we live in a tall Victorian semi, and there were 2 pairs of them. Ours was up for sale, and the one 2 doors down was up for sale. Ours had been rented out for years and was a mess. This one was immaculate. So I looked at both, and then I went, ooh, so I could take that wall down and I could do that. So it was almost like a before and after. So I was very lucky to be able to do that. But I think going back to what we were talking about earlier, you need to get your priorities straight, and you need to work out what's important to you. If you're planning, I hate to bring up the whole catchment schools area, but if you are planning to have children...
No, this is important stuff. Let's bring it, come on, give us the priorities.
Well, things, again, it's so different. If you really like to cook, is there going to be enough space to have a big open plan kitchen? Or if you're not that bothered about that, then that's not a priority. Are you planning on it being your forever home? The other thing I would suggest doing, if you're buying with someone, and I often say this, and I've said it to people ever since I've been an estate agent, is sit down in separate rooms and write a list of your top 10 wants, and then swap.
Okay.
See, I don't care about off-road parking. Not bothered about it at all.
Right.
But I know a lot of people are.
Yeah.
Bedroom sizes. I love big bedrooms. I love big bathrooms. A lot of people don't. So it's working out what is important to you, and you have to be on the same hymn sheet. Yeah. Otherwise, people like you get driven mad. Yeah,
well, it's entirely subjective, isn't it? The other option is you just don't make any decisions and let your wife make the decisions, which is what I did. And, I didn't even see...
Do you know what? You probably get a big old insight into relationships.
Yeah.
I mean, how much of it is managing couples' expectations, if it is indeed
there's a big part of it. Ultimately, there's usually always a compromise, but there's usually one side of the couple that is clearly less invested. There's one side of the couple that's being dragged around, and the other one's like skipping into the rooms. That's usually the way it goes, which was in my case. I hadn't seen my place until we exchanged. But
you hadn't seen your house.
No, but that's
a lot of trust.
Thank you. That's exactly what I was going to say. So I think it shows how much I love and
are you happy
trust
there?
my wife. Yeah, thankfully, yeah. But like I said,
Hang on, wait a minute. I was going to say, can we get some of this? You're an estate agent and you left it to your...
Extreme confidence. I was happy with it remotely. She was happy. That's 90% of the battle.
I think location's important as well, because I think, particularly if you're a first-time buyer and you have a spot that you really, really love and you can't afford it, I always call it the ripple effect. Think about dropping a pebble in a lake and watching it ripple out. So when I first moved to London, I lived in Wandsworth, which
Very
was
nice. South London.
Early 90s. Everyone wanted to live over the river. They all wanted to be in Chelsea or Fulham. Nobody wanted to touch Wandsworth. I couldn't afford Fulham or Chelsea. And I liked Wandsworth. And I remember buying my first flat when I was 21. Wow. It was above a well-known pizza chain. So I can never eat their spinach and egg pizza now without thinking about that flat. But, I think if people are listening to this and they're thinking, I really want to live here, but my budget won't stretch, start looking out.
I think this is really important advice because, like you, I bought my first place and I was in 2004. And it was an area where not many people were living. It was a little area called London Fields, which, as we all know, because now we are where we are, it was just boomed. But at that point, you wouldn't go there. But it was the only place I could afford. And I really like this flat. But I do speak to a lot of young people who say they really want to get on the property market. They're worried about how to afford a mortgage, which we will talk about. But they want to live in the area they want to live in.
So then you have to compromise. And that's the thing. If you desperately want to be in that area and all your budget will stretch to is a studio flat, then so be it. And I think it comes back again to what we were talking about, priorities. It's working out your own individual set of priorities. If you want the location to be the most important thing, then you're going to compromise on size. If you want a bigger house or a bigger flat, then you're going to need to move further out.
I think that changes as you get older as well, right? Like your first place, you're maybe willing to compromise on location and, slum it or whatever you need to do to get your foot on the ladder, which is the most important thing. Whereas when you've got little ones and a wife and everything else, maybe location is more of a preference. But the reality is you're only there because you got your foot on the ladder in the first place. And the foresight to buy in London Fields is, incredible because the prices there now are through the roof.
But again, nobody wanted to live there at the time. It's only because I knew, and this is the God's honest truth, there was a really nice pub. And I'd been to the pub and I thought, I like the pub. It's very important. I mean, that was my priority. I was early 20s. My priority was the pub. Let's talk property market. There are lots of people listening who will want some advice. Give us an overview of the situation.
The market's incredibly precarious and it's probably the most mercurial I've seen it in a very, very long time. Cost of living is a concern for people. Money isn't cheap anymore and rising interest rates are definitely hampering the demand to some degree. But what we tend to find is any homes that are family homes are incredibly, incredibly resilient because they're reliant on what we call a constant demographic. People are buying there for different reasons. Financials are there and they're important, but the priority is schooling or kids or space or, if your wife's pregnant with twins, like in my case, you have to move. You can't stay in a 2-bedroom flat wherever you're in if you've got 4 kids. So I think that need to move keeps the most of London pretty resilient, especially the confidence in capital growth over time as well, averaged at 8% a year according to Rightmove. So, I am conscious and sensitive that might not be viable or possible for all people, but certainly family home market in London has proven to stay pretty resilient.
I think you need to get all your eggs in your basket, so to speak, before you even start. When the demand outstrips the supply, it's a scary time. I know where I live, we've got really good schools. It's green and leafy. It's very lovely. One house comes on the market and it's like that scene from Gladiator with Russell Crowe. They're all there. There's all these buyers potentially ready to go and it's like unleash hell and they're all there,
Estate agent's dream though.
I mean, it isn't because people make that assumption, I get it, but ultimately if we don't have enough houses to sell and we're annoying the other 10 people that have made an offer on it because they haven't bought the house, it's not the ideal situation. But you've touched on probably the biggest point because the London market is always underpinned by supply and demand, and typically there is always a lack of supply if you want to be on a certain road or in a certain location. So even when you're reading in the press that the market's on its knees, I promise you if it's a property on a prime road, it is selling.
I think you need to make sure that you've got all your finances in place. That's so important, because it's no good looking. You don't even bother looking until you know that you can afford it and know exactly how much money that you've got, and factor in all your fees and all your costs and your moving and all of that. You have to have that amount ready to go, 100%. The other thing I would say, and it's interesting because Grant and I are from different times. Back in the 80s, we didn't have computers. We had this little, I used to call it my hot box. It was sat on my desk, and I had all my buyers that I liked and were ready to go at the front of that box.
Oh, interesting.
So whenever we got a property
make friends with your estate
I was about
agent.
to say the very same thing.
Yeah.
We live in a society now where it's all done online, isn't it? You know, all the vast majority of it. That's where you first start to look for property.
Yeah.
Go into an office, speak to a human being. It makes the world of difference, because they're there then. And when something comes on, if you take something on, if you've met that person, instantly they're the one.
That's how I got my first flat.
Yeah.
Because I made friends with the estate agent. There was another person who wanted it, and she was in a position to go as well. And she turned up with her mum to have a look. But he was like, I'm going to help you. Get on the property ladder. And that was it.
You're spot on. I mean, it is as simple as that a lot of the time. It's if they call you before anyone else, then you've got a stronger chance of getting the house. But the slight problem is now there's 50 estate agents on every high street. So unless you're going to make friends with every single estate agent on the high street, it's tricky.
A lot. So from hot boxes to social media.
Yeah.
I mean, the world, like, this is where you are now. Like, you've kind of opened this whole new world up.
Yeah.
Love what you're doing on social
Thank you.
media. Literally take us into people's... do people buy from social media?
Yeah.
Tell us,
20%.
explain this new world to us.
20% of my business last year came from social media. There's a real desire, not just with property, but across the board in terms of media, to have quick, short information. And I think it's a lot easier to jump on and see a 90-second video than it is to review the details of the floor plan, go around and see it. And you can get a very good idea from video.
Yeah, you can.
I mean, I'm shocked, really. We were discussing it briefly before, that video in general, even aside from social media, hasn't been used years ago, because it's such a cleaner way to view property than slightly wider than typical shots of the best parts of the house, because the video shows everything. And I think there's a nice...
And you get a feel of the flow.
And it's slightly more informal, and people like that. I think the days of doing business incredibly formally are done and dusted, to be quite frank. I think you still need to retain the professionalism and the knowledge, but it needs to be an element of personality with it as well.
So we've talked about buying. We've talked about buying off social media, but what about people who want to sell?
Come on, quite Amanda. A bit, yeah.
Do you want to
Where are we going to go with this? Top tips.
So
anyone who wants to put their property on the market, 2023.
Well, I'm going to just go back to the 90s a minute and talk about the cleaning fairy. So I was trying to sell a house. I can still remember the address of it, number 2 Bolton Road in Southsea, and it was on with multiple agents. And it was owned by a guy that used to use it at the weekends. And it was a bit like, do you remember Men Behaving Badly? It was a bit like a kind of Neil Moore. It was a mess. Oh, God. And we could not...
And he only used it at the weekends?
Yeah.
It was still a mess?
He used to come down and party with all his mates and then go back up to London. And 6 months we were trying to sell this thing for. So I had a viewing and it was like, hallelujah. So I turned up with some rubber gloves, let myself in because I knew he wasn't going to be there. And I cleaned it.
You cleaned this man's
house? I emptied the curry cartons. I cleared out the ashtrays. I made the bed. I aired it. I gave it a quick squirt with some air freshener. Showed the people around. And on the Monday, they called and said, we would love to put in an offer. I was like, yes, I've done it. And I called him up. I went, oh, hello, Mr. Jones. It's Amanda here from GA. I've managed to sell the house. We've got an offer. He went, oh. No, I sold it 4 months ago through the Halifax, didn't I tell you? Oh. They hadn't changed the locks. So the new owners were just as messy as the old owners.
Oh, my God.
And they'd gone out and I'd come in and completely transformed
it. That's hilarious.
But the main point of that story was presentation is everything.
Okay. Does this mean you have to redecorate? Because what is presentation?
Just clean it.
I was about to say yes.
Would you say yes?
Go on.
I mean, I just think there's a lot to be said for staging, and the difficulty with it is, it's hard to quantify for people. Okay, I'm going to spend this much. All people care about is it going to add value to my house?
What if you're living in it? You're living in a house. You got kids. You got a dog.
I accept that, but you've got to pretend you don't live there for the period of the viewings. Yeah, you've got to disappear, pretend you don't live there, vacate the house. Not permanently, but for the showings. So the way I often organise it is, I'll say, okay, these 2-3 days we're going to access. These 2-3 days we need it show home Game-esque. You know, you need to pretend you don't live there for that period. Give me a slot on this time and I'm bringing people through, because there's so much emotion involved in buying a house. And even though the reality is it is not going to stay like that for more than 2 minutes after someone moves in, it's all about presentation. So staging, little bit of decoration, you know, there's loads of little things you can do, but like, you know, squeaky smoke alarms that I feel like everyone has in their house because they haven't changed the battery, do that. Grouting on bathrooms, repaint kids' fingerprints on the wheels, the walls, and exterior as well, like plant pots, make sure the exterior looks fresh. You don't want people to rule it out before they've gone through the door. So
I have a golden rule: trim your bush and polish your knockers.
Okay, yeah.
Hey! That is, but it's the first thing that people see when you're online. You spend on average, I read this somewhere, I don't know whether it's true or not, but you spend on average of between 5 to 8 seconds looking at the photograph. And if, like Grant was saying, you know, if the bins are out, if the door isn't, you know, painted, if the bush is overgrown, you've got to sort it out. The other thing I find,
do you think that could reduce the value, the offer you get, if it's not quite...
Yeah, like it doesn't, it's a difficult one because it doesn't change literal value, but it changes appeal, which could change the value in terms of what someone offers. Because if someone falls in love and they're emotionally invested,
they can offer.
I always say it's like a piece of art, right? It's got a residual value, but you'll pay whatever you need to, which is why prices in London don't stay the same for a long period of time. They tend to always go up because people fall in love and pay a premium for the street and whatever. But bin day is a good one. Yeah, do not do viewings on a bin day. It's awful.
I think another thing that I often say to people is, imagine you've sold the house. You know, imagine that all of this has to be moved. So if you're starting to think about, you know, if you're just dipping your toe in at the moment and you're starting to think about it, imagine having to clear it out. Imagine the removal van is outside. So start the decluttering process before you put it on the market.
Yeah.
So Amanda, your top tips for selling?
Well, selling's an interesting one. If you live in a fast-moving market like London, you might as well just put a board up outside and sit back and wait for the offers to come. But there are lots of parts of the country where it's not so fast-moving. First of all, check out your competition. You know, work out, you know, your house, have a look at all the other houses that are similar to yours that are on the market. What do they look like? How are they presented? Talking about presenting, you have to present to sell. Strip it back. Make each room fit for the purpose that it's intended. This is an interesting one. So if you've got a spare bedroom that's become the dumping ground, or the ironing board is in there and there is no bedroom or no bed, put a bed in it.
Yeah.
You'll be amazed at the amount of people that will walk into a bedroom, and if there isn't a bed in it, will say, well, we can't get a bed in here. You know, we can because it's a bedroom. Yeah. So you have to stage each room. The vast majority of people, when they walk into a house, they can't imagine themselves living in it if it's full of somebody else's clutter.
Yeah.
Okay, and I do have about 1,000 CDs and about 40,000 books. So
there you go.
Okay, I'm just going to expose that much of myself. All right, Grant, what about rent versus buying? There will be a lot of people, particularly first-time buyers, and maybe people who already have bought, but now they're not sure what to do about once they've sold. Do you sit tight with your money and wait and rent, or is rent dead money? What should we be doing?
I think it's subjective, but the best time to buy was 20 years ago. The next best time is today. And I always say to people, don't concentrate on time in the market, just concentrate on your time in the market. So don't overthink it, is my very short, candid opinion. But of course, you've got to look at the financials, but it's impossible to pick the bottom. It's impossible to try and predict. Even I can't predict what's going to happen with interest rates and base rate and everything else. So I just think it's when you're personally comfortable and when you're ready. And as we said earlier, you know, you need to run your numbers tenfold, and you need to account for changes and make sure that when you commit, you can afford it, not for the next 2-3 years, for the next 10 years.
Or if you're moving out of the area, that's an interesting one. So if you were living in a city, and what a lot of people have done post-COVID, I think, is move out, you know, to the country.
Or downsize.
Or downsize, yeah. So if that's the case, or if you're moving to somewhere completely different, then renting maybe isn't as bad, because you can get a sense of, you know, when you first move to an area, you haven't got a clue, have you? Apart from the fact there's a pub next door. But, you know, you want to get a feel for the place. So sometimes I think, if you are leaving a big city and you're moving to a different part of the country, renting isn't always a bad thing, because you can just base yourself for 6 months and sort of start to work out the areas that you want to be, or the type of...
You definitely can, but I'd be careful about taking your foot off the ladder in that situation. If it's your only asset and you've sold it and you're in rented and the market rockets and speeds away from you, it's a very risky game to play. So I get it in terms of working out an area, for sure, but I'd say always have a foot on the ladder in some capacity. if it's an option, depending on your personal financial circumstances.
Oh, it's good. It's like having the best advice from my mum and dad. This is. Love it.
I'm not sure how to take that, but I'll take it
In
as
a good
compliment.
way.
Yeah.
Your older brother and sister.
Okay, lovely.
Your mates.
Yeah.
Your mates.
Much better.
Yeah.
Mates.
You're highly informed
Yeah.
mates. Lovely. Are you ready for some quick fire questions, you two?
Go on then.
I'm going to put you on the spot. Are you ready for a challenge?
Yes.
No, yes.
I was ready for gin and tonic actually, but
I
let's
mean,
do the
it's
challenge
coming,
first.
don't worry. Okay, so I've got a list of statements that I'm going to read out to you, and these are things that people often ask Hamptons estate agents. You've just got to give me the advice,
Okay.
whether it's true or not. Here we go. I don't want to work with an agency. It's cheaper to sell my own home, surely.
Oh, but you don't get that personal touch, do you? And you don't get the expert knowledge.
Grant,
Yeah.
why am I wasting my money giving it to an estate agent?
I wish I'd had it's probably the most offensive thing. So, I mean, it's my career, and you're literally telling me I shouldn't even be in your house, which is great. Look, I think it's just employ the expert, right? If we're salespeople, we're there for a reason. And if our pedigree is what it is, then we're going to be able to deliver a much, much stronger price. If you're not a salesperson, please don't attempt it.
I'm not a salesperson, and I would need someone like you to hold my hand through the whole process.
And even aside from the sales element of it, you need to understand the market. You need to be able to have like granular conversations with people about what the market's doing, where it's going, the fundamentals of it. And I just think you could be biting off more than you can chew. And also, you're personally invested as an owner. You know, you will get offended.
Someone comes round and says, I'm not sure about that.
yeah, my head out, get out.
Yeah,
my house is
for
worth
sure.
£1 million.
Yeah.
Really, everyone else's is worth £160,000.
This is rubbish. Really?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, good.
I'd be
Yeah.
rubbish. I'd just be offended and kicking them out. All right, next one. I'm selling my home next year, so there's really no point in doing any work on it, surely. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, you absolutely have to do the basics. You've got to stage it. Definitely don't put an extension on. You know, you don't need to start doing any major works, but as we said earlier, you know, the basics, the staging, the decoration, you know, cleaning the carpets, presenting it as well as you can within a certain budget, minimal cost, it's essential.
You're selling the dream. I think one of the
Yeah.
reasons why when you go to these enormous housing estates, they have a show home. They have a show home because they are selling the dream to you. That's why there's a croissant and a newspaper with some reading glasses perched on the side. They're doing it because people can walk in and go, oh, I could be sitting there eating a croissant. That's what show
croissant looks
homes are. Yeah, I've often quite eaten them. But I think it is really important, as Grant said, you have to do the bare minimum. Make it presentable, make it smell nice.
Yeah, big one.
I've been in some
Big
shockers.
One. You don't need to like bake bread or cookies. You don't need to go like full American on it, but you certainly need to make sure it
Nice
doesn't.
candle.
Yeah, or if you've got a dog, like I'm sure your dog doesn't smell, but you know
She
other
really
people can
doesn't.
smell it.
Yeah.
Make sure that the house is smelling good.
It's cheaper to rent than get a mortgage in 2023.
Not where I live.
Yeah, not if you factor in capital growth. It might be short term, but it's not going to be if that property's worth 20% more in a year's time.
I think it's really important as well to recognise that a lot of people can't buy at the moment and renting is the only option.
Exactly.
And I think if you are going into that rental market, as much as you can, you know, it's such a tricky one, isn't it?
You've got to keep your costs down, I think. The plan, you know, I appreciate not everyone can buy right now, but ultimately, if you are going to rent or if you're in a situation where you have to rent, I'd say live well below your means to try and build up that pot to buy. And it is impossible. It was much easier 10, 20 years ago, right? But, you know, do what you can because...
Like your mum and dad's back room. See, I'm trying to get rid of my kids at the moment, even though they're only 9 and 14. But I often keep saying to them, please don't come back.
Yeah.
At 18, you're off. But it is very difficult, isn't it?
It's so difficult. I know we know a whole generation who, unless your parents can afford to help you, how are you supposed to get on the property ladder? You know, it's very, very difficult. So for a lot of people, renting is the only option. So live well below your means.
Well, if that is the only option, that would be my advice. You'll romanticize it about it in 5 years.
Or just, you know, we are a country obsessed with buying property. There are plenty of places in Europe that just don't.
Yeah.
People rent forever and that's fine.
Yeah, but a lot of places in Europe, or certain places in Europe, the rent will be fixed and it won't be going up the pace it is here.
Yeah.
That's the risk. I think sometimes renting, it seems like a good option short term, but it can end up being quite a dangerous option long term.
I think if you are planning on renting or you can only afford to rent, it's a really good idea, again, like we talked about earlier with the ripple effect. Look in certain areas where the rent might be slightly cheaper, maybe get a slightly smaller property, get the basics that you can afford, and then, like Grant was saying, save as much as you can in order to try and buy.
I don't need to worry about planning permissions unless my house is old.
Always get planning permission, because the
there's-
thought of living on your nerves, worrying that someone's going to, tell on you, or you're going to be told to pull it down. Don't ever.
Also, you can't sell it.
Yeah.
When you come to sell it and the lawyer looks at that and the buyer sees you've got no planning permission for your double-story extension you've done at the back, I mean, you're not selling it.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Just
basic.
do it above board.
Just
Get
do it.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of becoming a landlord. Is it worth it?
Yes and no. I mean, it's definitely not all roses. There's struggles. And I think the biggest mistake people make with becoming a landlord is they just throw themselves into it because they think property, wherever you buy it, is going to be a great investment, which isn't true. I think the first thing you need to do is realize it's an investment, and you need to decide what you're trying to make this investment do. So are you looking to generate more income? Are you looking for it to be a safeguard, like a replacement for your pension? Because there's very different areas and different ways to invest. So for example, I've got quite a few properties up in the northeast in Darlington where you've got a huge rental return. So that's the purpose of that, is income. I've got a fair few properties in London, but if you think that you're going to make money from renting in London, you are sadly mistaken. You do not make any, very, very little per year, certainly not enough to warrant the stress. So you're banking there on capital growth over time, because historically London always increases in price. So I think the first thing to do is decide why you're doing it. Don't just assume it's going to be a great investment, whatever you do, and then think about, based on what you're looking to get out of it, where you're going to put your money.
I'm never playing Monopoly with him.
No, I know. He's a winner. That's it. He's Mayfair.
He would take Park Lane. He's ruthless.
We'd be on Old Kent Road, me and you.
I always
We'd be in jail.
I always buy Old Kent Road. It's a great investment.
There you go.
Number one tip, hotels on Old Kent Road.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Grant. I thoroughly enjoyed that. It's been so brilliant to have you here with me, and I have definitely learnt a lot on decluttering as of this evening. Now, that may well be all we have time for, but you can join the conversation online. We want to hear about your property stories, so get in touch, and don't forget to use our hashtag, #NoPlaceLikeHamptons. See you next time.